Sorry, Senator Ward, you have some questions?
Yeah, thanks very much.
Go for it.
Hi, thanks, gents, for being here today. I saw some recent media reports about some abandoned fuel drums near Wilkes Station, or rather at Wilkes Station near Casey. Obviously legacy waste from the 60s, if I recall. Can you talk to me about what's being done to clean them up? Because there's obviously quite a large number of them, and the reports say that they contain not only fuel but also some chemicals, and that apparently they're leaching.
Wilkes Station was built by the Americans in 1957 and it was handed over to the Australians in 1959, and the Australians used Wilkes for about 9 years, and all of that waste was a legacy of that station. And Dr. Nick Gales can describe what the scientists are doing now.
Thank you.
So again, it's a fairly major part of the science program to try and deliver the science outputs that can steer effective management of those areas. So scientists from the Antarctic Division are actually global leaders in trying to remediate soil contamination in polar environments. Mm-hmm. And we've been conducting over the last decade a range of experiments that look at special barriers. They look like a heavy-duty fly wire, if you like, that you can put in the ground that prevents the spread of materials, as well as actually getting the materials remediated in Antarctica in these things called biopiles, where we treat them in a manner, putting air through them and moderating the temperature that allows a very rapid bacterial action that can break it down to much more acceptable levels. So there's been a huge emphasis on developing the science that can then be implemented in the management framework so that we don't have to bring back all of the materials. We've had surveys through the areas of contamination so that we know what's there, and we've specifically remediated particular sites like the Tala Valley as a way of developing these techniques that can then be implemented at a larger scale on some of these sites. At the same time, in our policy sort of forums, we've been driving major changes through the Antarctic Treaty System to try and get some clear objectives and methods around remediating other contaminated sites. There are many legacy sites across Antarctica. So it's very much within our purview to move to this. It's a large amount of waste, perhaps 17,000 cubic metres through that area, and you don't want to go in and start disturbing the areas until you have a very well organised plan of how you'll deal with the whole thing. So our development of the techniques has been our lead-in towards that.
Sure. So how's the funding for that program? Because it sounds like the science is coming along nicely, but you referred to an umbrella management plan. Is that being funded by government? And what's the time frame for when the site will be remediated?
So we've remediated, as Nick said, Tala Valley waste disposal site near Casey Station, and that was a major undertaking, and we learnt from that, and we're still learning the techniques to remediate Wilkes. So there's not a funding stream to remediate Wilkes. There is a funding stream to do the scientific research to understand the techniques that we could use to remediate Wilkes.
Thanks, Chair. With the provision of additional funding, might that stream speed up?
No. Additional funding will be used to remediate Wilkes. The science is developing, and in the next 2 years, I think we'll have the techniques to be able to remediate Wilkes.
Okay. What environmental damage is being done in the meantime by those leaking drums?
We're monitoring it, and I'm not quite sure how the monitoring is going, but can you provide any detail?
Well, we're certainly aware that in the Wilkes area there will be highly localised contamination and impact. I think the area is generally, in the Tala Valley, there was looks at how the actual near-shore environment has been moderated by off-flow. So we know there are effects there. And at the moment we can really only model it, because really a monitoring program is a major effort in itself, and the focus has been on developing the techniques under which we'd actually remediate it. So we've scanned the area, we know what's there, and that can enable planning for future remediation efforts.
Sorry, just to make sure I've got that correct, you've got funding to do the science so that the remediation will be appropriate.
Yes.
But there's not any monitoring of the environmental damage being done, there's only modelling of that damage, is that correct?
Well, the work on monitoring really has been trying to understand the scale and the nature of the contamination there. So that's been recently efforts to survey the entire area, which is how we've derived approximate estimates of the amount, that's 17,000 cubic metres. We're aware of the nature of a lot of that waste, and we have managed to do impact research from the Tala Valley. That has not yet been initiated across in Wilkes, but I think that would be part and parcel of the whole remediation effort in the future.
Okay, so the reports were that thanks Chair, that the chemicals were accumulating on the sea floor, as you just alluded to, but that there was also build-up in local plants and animals. That's incredibly alarming, and I'm disturbed that there's not funding being provided to address those effects, at least to monitor them and to turbocharge that scientific remediation program such that you can actually stop those environmental effects.
We've been looking at the sediments, and I can't provide the detail of that sediment analysis. I could provide it in due course.
Thank you. If you could take that on notice, that would be great. Thanks, gents.
Thank you, folks. We'll take
Chair,
it.
just to be
Yes.
brief, if I can add one little piece of additional information in relation to some of the questions about the Standing Council on Environment and Water, and that is, I'm advised that the government expects a meeting of Commonwealth, State and Territory Environment Ministers to be held in late March of this year, following the outcomes of the Tasmanian and South Australian elections, obviously pending the availability and coordination of all of the relevant state ministers.
Wonderful. We'll take